Good morning, Charles, and good morning, everyone, from this wonderful wheat belt of Quairading. It's about just under 2 hours out of Perth. It's a key that we're currently doing a whole exercise over the last 3 months called Imagine Quairading. Let's have conversations about our future. And we've just been engaging a whole range of people here to basically ask the simple question, what do you care about? What matters to you, and who else cares about that? What can we collectively do? It also happens to be the home of one of the co-ops, and you can get that on the front slide. And today is very much talking about this model called the cooperative model that's been very much part of our rural heritage for a long period of time. The earliest co-ops were back there in the 1860s, and we've just seen in some of our states, particularly where I am in Western Australia, this model has been used by communities in terms of economic development for a long period of time. We've got a long history of it. So it's great to share that. And it's also great to share about this model as this is the year of the cooperative internationally declared by UN. The co-op model is not just a model for Australia, it's very dominant across Europe, across North America, across Asia, and increasingly in Africa, it's being used. So it's a wonderful thing that I've been passionate about ever since I was a young guy. Certainly, I've been part of a number of them. I particularly love to just kick off with a good quote. And as I said earlier, I just love kind of like the words of Margaret Wheatley, whatever the issue, community is the answer. I want to just begin, though, and as we move to slide 3, to begin to talk about the fact that this thing called community-owned enterprise, of which the co-op is just one model that people are actually using, is very much alive and well in small town Australia and has a very, very kind of like long history of development. For example, if I look at my own state, in many of our small towns, we have licensed clubs that have been running for a long period of time. Here in Quairading, there's at least 3 who are members of this group called Club WA. They have been running, whether it be the bowling club or the Quairading club or the a licensed facility and everything that goes with the management of that and the finances of that for a long period of time. And again, in almost every country town, we've got kind of like evidence of people coming together to create a commercial kind of like enterprise. Um, our local parents and citizens or NFs and whatever, many of them have been doing for a long period of time commercial activity. Many of them own and manage and run and finance a canteen. They do catering contracts. They're engaged in fundraising. They're often doing community events. Again, it's not that we in community towns haven't had that kind of like involvement. And then when it comes to special events, some of those are huge today. This one that you just seen, coming in terms of a field day in Dowra, a massive event that attracts, up to 30,000 people. That is an enterprise. That employs staff. That actually turns over, hundreds of thousands of dollars and whatever. So again, a community initiative that started by the local Lions Club, who had a vision to create a special event. If you move on to the next one, lots of great examples of examples of where stuff is actually happening. Sorry, Charles, keep moving. Next one after Darren, the Coolum Bush races up the road from where I am. This is the 31st, second year that this community, when they decided they wanted to be more than a dot on the map, decided to instigate an event. Last year, tickets sold out in 58 seconds. It generated back over $600,000 to the local community in profit. It generated $3 million into the local economy. It is an enterprise. It is kind of like a huge undertaking, all run by 250 communities. And then we look at when communities have lost kind of like services, and the classic in many of our wheatbelt towns is the loss of the pub. Here is a great example back there in the 90s when, that little town of Carew up there in the Midwest kind of like lost kind of like its pub, looked like it wasn't going to open. Community came together. How did they fund it? Well, they started a cropping program, and again, an enterprise. They generated money by jointly, collectively sowing and harvesting kind of like a farm. And through that, have created the Karoo Community Farm, which again is another example of community enterprise. We've got other examples of that thing as well. If we can move on, Charles. For example, now in Wheatbelt, Western Australia, in the grain growing regions, we've got about 11 community owned pubs operating like the Karoo one. And I love this particular one in the little town of Bulgard. And I think Paul Michael, driving force, community builder behind all of it, really identified when he rallied people. The town loses a pub, the first step to closing the town down. Can't be the community. If no one else is interested in running a pub, we need to give. And that's an example where a set of families formed a community kind of like structure and did it. One of the earliest, again, they had a cropping program. They've always had a cropping program. And what did they use their money when their pub closed down? They took over a fairly derelict pub, ended up kind of like demolishing and rebuilding kind of the Nyabin, and they call it the Hub. And again, a stunning. You can see the original pub there in the bottom left. What they've created is an amazing facility, not just for locals to hang out, but has become also an important destination for visitors, for cyclists coming through and whatever. Again, great example of a small community of under 200 doing that. And the one that I really love up the road, population 56 people, Magumba. This is actually owned by the Rodeo Association, who puts on probably the best kind of like rodeo in WA on New Year's Eve. And through the funding generated from that one big enterprise, when the pub looked like closing because the owners couldn't find a buyer, they wanted to retire, they did a deal with the community through its Rodeo Club. And through that, have created this amazing one. And it's one I'll keep coming back to because it's probably one of the best that really sees that part of its success is reminding people we're community owned, we're community run. Therefore, found that a very important part of their marketing. One that we've been really excited to see, and people caught up in our community builders program were instrumental in this, is the Darkin Hotel down there, and going down towards the Great Southern there, just out of Williams, a little town called Darkin. Pub had been closed for a number of years. The community kind of like came together. And again, this is a community kind of like project again, an increasing number of families value collectively as a community creating. What I love about this one is the next slide will show is that it wasn't just community putting money into making it happen. It was community kind of like using it as a way of really building inclusion and involvement by the community. And again, amazing operation that just keeps growing and growing in terms of what it's offering as a community pub. But I just love the fact that this truly was one that both young and old in that community saw the importance of that community enterprise in making it happen. And there's wonderful examples, not just here in WA, but across Australia where people have done it. One of my favourites, got a long history, is in Renmark with this amazing Art Deco pub. Been around since the 1930s and whatever. South Australia's got a really great history of community-owned pubs across South Australia, and this is just one of my favourite. I love it. But it's not just pubs in other areas as well. If we could move on, Charles. Here's a little town of Ongerup. There's kind of like less than 100 people in this town, right down there in the Great Southern, just out of Noangerup. Here, not only did the community decide to buy the pub, service station, supermarket, and cafe, they realised all four of those were important. If it's me, it's up to me with the attitude, and you can see the group who did it. People just cared to make sure they did not lose those incredible services in it. And again, great example, kind of like community ownership, is this tiny little place. Then we all are aware what happened in the late 90s when the four big banks decided to close down 5,000 bank branches, mainly in small town Australia. Along came this model. It's a form of community ownership. It is kind of like a community franchise model that many communities kind of like adopted. And we just know the impact that actually made and so on. Today, it's a struggle because its owner of the franchise, I think, is wanting to move away from much of that community ownership. But boy, hasn't it been powerful? Have a look at this next slide. It's probably, probably 12 months out of date. But have a look at what was achieved. I mean, it's interesting that 323 communities saw the value of coming together and investing and creating it. All of these were driven from within. There was no government program for community banks. There was no government support. This was about local people realizing we can't lose our bank. I can remember a few years ago that the Bendigo Bank told me 10,000 communities had actually contacted them about doing this model. In the end, 323 pulled it off, and boy, hasn't it been a success. The other one I've become very aware of through my work in South Australia is just how many communities actually own their caravan park. Seen that as an incredible initiative that communities can actually take in terms of creating it. And again, some stunning facilities. And I love in many ways how these run. I need to just point out one I really love is that Laura community caravan park. The really cute thing, if you just go back a slide on Charles, back to the one we had, the community in Laura, for example, their caravan park, doesn't it get any cuter when people turn up and the thing they're greeted with is a plate of fresh scones, jam, and cream? To me, it's just part of what people remember when they're actually there. You go to the one in Crystal Brook. They, for example, are constantly developing what's a stunning facility. But one of the recent things, again, doing a deal, council, them, and the Ed Department putting in, are funded by all three. Community Council and the Ed Department, where teachers use them during the school part of the year, tourists and the visitor in non-school. Again, that type of housing partnership coming out of a caravan park owned and run by the community. Again, this is the type of enterprise activity that I'm just excited about seeing across Australia. Moving on to that little great town that we have in the southwest there in Pingelly. Here, for example, they recognise that whole area of ageing in place and the fact that we have these Commonwealth stay-at-home packages, and which tended to be serviced by service land out of our capital cities, driving in and out, sucking out all that money, a real leakage. A place like Pingelly 7 years ago came up with a model of kind of like, let's actually create a business in town that's about capturing those home packages, providing then employment for local people. I need to say, this little town of Pingelly, population around 1,000 people, this initiative is now the biggest business in town. It employs 16 kind of like staff at the local community resource centre who run it with the Somerset Alliance people. It's employing 45 local people as contractors. Over half of them happen to be over 60. It is an amazing enterprise. It generated well over $5 million into the local economy last year, and today is the biggest enterprise in the town in the social service kind of like area. They tell me that there are 55 other small towns now have borrowed their model and trying to implement it. Each of them happen to be a community enterprise. Community farms, cropping programs, these are common. These have been in place in many of our rural towns for a long period as a fun kind of like raiser. But when you suddenly create a community farm and a cropping, that's an economic activity. It requires management and leadership in the economic sense. And again, another great example of what actually happens in many of these in many of our small towns. And then municipal enterprise, look what often our local governments in country towns are doing. Many of them are running caravan parks, cafes. Town of Yalgoo, for example, the council runs the post office. If they didn't do it, no one would. So again, to keep that service, the council there in Yalgoo runs the fuel outlet within the town. And again, many of them in WA actually operate the local community resource centre. Increasingly are kind of like enterprises, businesses, many of them with budgets in, $200,000 to $300,000. So, we have had a great history and a contemporary kind of like experience of people using this thing called community enterprise. Great example of that recently in two WA towns, a little town of Bruce Rock there in the uh, keep going, Charles, you had it on. Um, Back there in 2020, in the height of COVID, the fellow who owned the local supermarket had really a breakdown during that time, took on this whole thought that somehow everyone was going to be affected COVID through coming into his shop, and one night comes in and sets light to the place and burns down his own supermarket plus his brother's hardware store next door. Incredibly sad story. But suddenly, this town of Bruce Rock, which is, a good 3 hours almost out of Perth, doesn't have a supermarket, doesn't have a hardware. And that community, through the leadership of their council and their Progress Association and their cropping program, ends up raising close to $4 million to kind of like reopen. It's taken 5 years of community planning and involvement. But today, an unbelievably stunning kind of like supermarket, amazing murals on the wall. And if you go to the next slide, you can see there great examples of what's actually being offered, including a major hardware kind of like component to make up from what they lost. This is a 5 year story of community enterprise, and particularly the type of role that local governments can actually play in the leadership of pulling it together. They quickly realised that, if they didn't do it, no one would. And the same recently, only last week, the new Perenjori supermarket opened again after a 5 year period when, the owners kind of like closed that down in 2000 and kind of like, I think it was around about 2020 or to 18. The community just hasn't had a supermarket. And then the actual building was destroyed when Cyclone Seroja came through. But again, through the leadership of the Perenjori Shire Council, and they drove on, which again is, again, around about a $4 million project to actually build their own facility and then attract in a leasee to actually operate it. That facility just opened, within the last 10 days. Amazing in terms of that community. I love the words of Jude Sutherland, one of the great community builders in rural Australia, when she said, attracting new families, businesses, and staff for the town is important. It's very difficult to attract people without services like this. It creates a community hub and it links all the businesses in the main street. That's their motivation. That's why this kind of like long story of 5 to 6 years has kind of like happened. But the celebrations that's been happening in that town in the last fortnight has been amazing, where they've been able to pull that off. So that's the background. And within it, there's one model that I particularly love to advocate as an option that people, when they want to think about community enterprise, want to think about the co-op. Now, the co-op has been around, as I said earlier, for a long, long time. And I suppose if I had to pick a model, and it's only one, and sometimes many of the examples that I've already quoted are not co-op structure that still has community ownership. But you'll see why I love this one in particular, called the co-op. If we just go on to the next slide, Charles, you can see there that co-ops and a recent publication, which we made available to everyone on this webinar. If we just go back one slide, Charles, defines clearly what we mean. Just go back one. Go back one, Charles. Co-ops are people-centered enterprises that own control. Go forward. They're owned, controlled, and run by and for their members to realise economic, social, cultural aspirations and needs. And to me, I just love this as a model. I love it that it's voluntary self-help. They're each autonomous. It brings people together in a very democratic way. Despite how much you might invest, you're only entitled to one vote in the co-op. It's always been a critical principle. And whether the members who form it are residents, customers, employees, co-ops have this thing called one member, one vote rule. They have equal voting rights. irrespective of the capital they invest in it. You don't get more democratic than that. And so to me, this co-op, which has really played such a huge role in rural Australia, is starting to come back into vogue and people are beginning to see its value. There's a major national organisation bringing co-ops and providing support called BCCM, Business Council of Co-ops and Mutuals. And I love what their CEO said. Co-ops are member-owned, formed for a social purpose, powered by commercial expertise. They're established to benefit the people who use or work in them rather than shareholders. And that's the critical thing that really excites me. In a co-op, people, not profits, are the beginning, middle, and end purpose. And increasing, many of these co-ops are operating to be what we call non-distributing, i.e. not giving back a financial return to their members, but investing that back in community for more. And I'll give you some great examples of that shortly. I loved this when I was in Canada working recently in Saskatchewan. There, the co-op, every town you go into in rural Saskatchewan has a co-op, often running the supermarket, the petrol station, the hardware store, often the post office. And I love this one I saw. We are members, we are owners, we are co-op. And to me, that one kind of like banner statement summarizes to me what it's actually all about. Next one. In terms of it, what it appeals to me about the co-op over using other forms of incorporated business models is it does have a set of values, and you can see the values identified in that particular slide. Stuff that I ideologically really feel strong about in terms of people coming together in solidarity, having a democratic model, this whole thing about self-help and the equity that kind of like comes through about it. Are one of the only business models that actually works on 7 key principles. Co-ops are one of the biggest operating economic forces across the globe. There are co-ops in every country on the planet, but they all share 7 principles that were all espoused by the original co-op that happened back in the 1840s in the little Lancashire town called Rochdale, when a group of people came together and founded their own shop to kind of like reduce the costs that working people had to pay. And they formed what we call the Rochdale Pioneers. And they formed a shop that gave back to their members kind of like products at a cheaper level. They formed the first consumer co-op. But they also espoused the 7 principles that all co-ops agree on. And again, I love those principles. Concern for community. Co-ops give back to their community. It's voluntary open membership. Anyone can actually apply. That member control, one member, kind of like one vote type stuff and whatever. Members are expected to participate. You need to be able to, when you register a co-op, be able to state how the membership is actually going to contribute to making it happen. I love all that. That kind of like just gets that civic involvement going at another level that we don't need and whatever. But those 7 principles are what underpins co-op across the planet. I love what one of our Aboriginal elders once said. We chose the co-op structure because we want to have an equal say. We want to share the responsibility. We want to work together to improve living conditions and our life chances. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of Aboriginal development cooperatives, and the very first tertiary institution ever created for Indigenous Australians was Tranby College, which in fact was training people in co-ops. One of the earliest tertiary training colleges that was really focused upon the need and economic opportunities of Indigenous Australians. So the co-op's been around a long time. We look at other kind of like structures that people often use, and again, you between using that and say a unit trust or using an incorporated structure and so on. To me, there are huge benefits just from the structure of it. And again, resource that and Charles will send to you at the end of this webinar, a handbook on how to set this up in small towns, actually articulates those benefits a lot more. Here in Australia, we, as I said, have got a long history. The very first one was founded in 1848. Sorry, there were 1848, and the very first co-op was around about 1846. But today we have 1848 what are called co-ops, or a thing that's slightly different called a mutual. Many of you will belong to a mutual if you happen to be in a Royal Automobile Club. That's a mutual. It's owned by the membership and whatever. Here in my state, we actually have 71 co-ops and 39 mutuals. The interesting thing is that most Australians don't know they belong to either a co-op and or a mutual, and some believe belong to many. 8 out of 10 Australians actually are a member of a co-op or a mutual, but only 3 out of 10 know that that's the case. Funny. Their combined membership, we have a population sitting around 25 to 26 million. The combined membership of those 1,848 co-ops happens to be 33 million people. Interesting kind of like statistic and reality. We underestimate this thing called the co-op. And again, next slide, if you actually have a look at the range of kind of like and the contribution to the Australian sector, absolutely amazing. Those 1,846 co-ops and mutuals, their turnover $37.76 billion last year. So this is not an insignificant kind of like part of the sector. It's a very important part in terms of how it operates, particularly in rural Australia. Here in WA, believe it or not, the height of the co-op was during those interwar periods when we actually had in rural WA and in small town WA, we had over 120 co-ops operating. Many of them were farmer co-ops providing needs for the farmer in terms of hardware and that stuff. But many towns also, their grocery shop happened to be the local co-op. And we had Wesfarmers, which went on to become the biggest co-op in the Southern Hemisphere, kind of like grew out of that and fostered a lot of that. And so across rural Australia today, we've got this evidence of these kind of like co-ops that were actually part of the infrastructure of many of our kind of like country towns. And certainly the consumer retail co-op is still alive and well. Sadly, though, we don't have 120. We're down to about 12. There's been massive loss of this as a structure, partly because of poor management, partly because of population kind of like decline. But, the co-op isn't what it used to be. Interesting, though, that of those 12, we actually do have 8 that have been around for 100 years, including the town that I'm currently working in, the town of Quirting. Their Quirting Farmers Co-op has been here for 102 years. Back in the 1970s, believe it or not, in this little town of Quirting, population today just under 1,000. Back in the 1970s, that co-op had 24 departments. It had a smash repair department. It had a car sales. It had a white goods. It had the grocery. And so many of these co-ops that have been around, as I said, these 8, have actually serviced their community in many, many ways. The Wagen one, for example, established in 1917, still operating, has serviced that community for well over 100 years. So people do have a history and involvement with this thing called the co-op. And when it comes to those 12 or 13 pubs that I talked about in rural, 3 of them have actually opted to be co-op pubs. And these are 2 of them, the Watheroo Station Co-op, where the community there, the population there is probably under 100 people. They've taken their beautiful old heritage railway station and it's become a pub, and with it they've built a motel. That's a great example of a co-op. And in the small town of Broome Hill, just out of Katanning, the community there in the last 4 years have actually taken on a pub that was closed down and converting that into a community co-op, offering both the pub facility as well as trying to provide accommodation. That Broome Hill village, you can see the bit of write-up that's been done about them in terms of what their vision is. But this is a community development co-op. This is one where members of the community have come together with the sole intent of getting the facility reopened, both as a a place to hang out again, but also as a place to provide for their housing needs and whatever. No one who invested in that is looking for some financial return. What they want are community returns, and that's what really excites me. We also have had great examples of what we call producer co-ops across rural Australia. And certainly today, the biggest cooperative in Australia, and I think now in the Southern Hemisphere, happens to be a West Australian company called CB8, Consolidated Bulk Handling. It is the biggest kind of like co-op out of those 1,800 that we talked about earlier. This one, founded during the Great Depression, it was kind of like farmers, and today there's 3,500 members who kind of like come together as a way of dealing with their grain storage and export and whatever. And it's grown into being one of the most powerful rural organisations and businesses in the country. It has over 100 kind of like grain receivable sites. It provides huge employment, particularly for uni students during the harvest season and whatever. It operates in 4 ports. It has its own rail fleet, a fertilizer business, and investments. It is massive. It is a co-op. It is owned by the 3,500 farmers in the grain growing region of WA. Great example of where a co-op can actually go. But the ones that really excite me are how people are now starting to look at services that they're losing in their small towns, how we might use the co-op to do it. We're aware that the challenges now in small towns are about housing, about healthcare, about childcare. They're about how people might begin to age and whatever. And so people are starting to look at how we might use the co-op to kind of like return or keep a particular service within town. And so, for example, a great example, the small town of Wagen, which has got a long history of cooperative activity. They've got many CBH members live in the town. They've got this co-op that's been around as a grocery store since 1917. The very first town to say, well, why don't we deliver home care, aged care support, help to keep people in place as a co-op. And so I mentioned earlier that people are emanating the Pingelly model. There's over 50 towns now trying to do it. The very first that said, well, you know what? We're going to be a bit different to other people. We're going to use the co-op to actually do it. And again, the what's called Cooperative Care Wagen has just been opened. It was launched only 2 months ago under the great leadership of a wonderful community builder, Wendy Pedrick, who has just driven that as a great example of how to use the old co-op model that many people in town had known about, grown up with, to actually begin to deliver support to keep people in place. Well worth going onto their website and seeing their history if you're interested in aging in place. Then we have employer-owned co-ops, and very much this Earthworker one operating in Morwell came out particularly from the restructuring that happened in that local economy in Gippsland. A great example of where workers have come together to form a co-op. That's another form of cooperative activity that people are starting to kind of begin to look at. And to me, one that I find incredibly exciting is one that's been started up, kicked off in 2018 when people in the small town of Wangerup, again, around about 1,200 people in the Great Southern, a number of like farmers there, particularly the house farmer from the house family, began to say, look, if we hope our kids are going to come back and take on our farm, they're going to come back partners, they'll want to bring family. We need to make sure that we have a viable kind of like economic life with our particular community. And so this particular town was in all the typical contraction. They had just lost 2 banks, their own 2 banks. They had lost their hairdresser, and the IGA owner was kind of like 85 and had lots of health issues, and it looked like they were going to lose their grocery store. So what happened back then is they decided to come together and to form a cooperative that really was about trying to create a vibrant kind of like CBD and business community that would continue to provide the services that would support families, as basic as that. So if we go on, that's what the main street, it looked pretty bland. You can see the closed down bank that was actually there. If we go on to the next slide, there, Charles, what happened? How are you going, Charles? What happened is that they decided to create what was called GMP 360. And you can see there the launch, you can see there the group that kind of like came together and said, you know what, we're going to use this old model that many of us know about. Every one of them is a CBH shareholder in the CBH. They understand how a co-op can work. But this one's a bit different. This is going to be a non-distributing. This is one where there won't be a financial return back to the shareholders. This is about community return. And so this group, under the leadership of Richard House and driven particularly Cassie Bennett there, you can see in the grey coat to the right. Boy, have they driven this particular service thing. If we can just keep moving on with slides, Charles, the first thing that they recognised is they just needed to start working on that main street. And what they realised is that if they didn't do something about their IGA and their supermarket, then it was just simply going to collapse. The guy had run it down well and truly. And so this is what it actually looked like. This is what they've actually got now. So their first investment was to take that supermarket and turn it into something incredibly attractive that would then attract in a business operator to run that particular IGA. And boy, have they been able to achieve that. Hasn't been easy in the midst of all of that. After it had been functioning incredibly well, there was a major fire. They're having to deal with that. But it's just amazing how the community have responded. They realise that you don't get second chance first impressions. So if they're wanting to get people locked into that main street, they started to instigate a whole pile of artwork in terms of really making that main street incredibly attractive in it. They bought a block and realised they gave it to the local council to develop a whole kind of like youth and child precinct area with skate park and that stuff to kind of like begin to bring life back into their particular main street. Keep going, Charles. We'll move through these fairly quickly. And so today, that main street has just been absolutely transformed by community using the co-op. They've invested their money into kind of like updoing it. They took over the old bank and attracted in a physiotherapist and a chiropractor and a whole pile of allied health services. They brought a hairdresser back into town. And today, their CBD has become very vibrant in terms of that. Working in partnership with local council, but above all, this is a community-owned, community-funded kind of like initiative. They raised over $500,000 to kind of like have a fund to do it. And one of the things they realised is that one of their great assets is they sit down there in the Stirling Ranges and the Prongerup. And why not create an alternative route to Albany? Normally, people just belt down the Albany Highway from Perth down to Albany. But you know, at Broome Hill, if you detoured and drove through the Prongerups, you're going to have one of the most spectacular drives. And so, what have they instigated? Two things. One is this, what's called the Horsepower Highway, where they've just created their own alternative route. And the second thing they've done is to embrace what's called gravel cycling. And again, developed up all the cycling routes that take people through. So this particular horse-powered highway, what they've simply done is to attract in these amazing, taken old tractors, got different groups. The one you can see down here at the bottom is a group of women put together this amazing one to highlight the contribution of women to the development of the community. The emergency fire people took one and built something out of a tractor that remind people, again, if we move on to the next one, Charles, to remind people of the contribution of emergency service. And then someone donated this one and they thought, what could we do with this? Now, within that town in the last couple of years is a growing Filipino community and who are there working on farms. There were 17 farm Filipino workers. And they said, you know, we need to highlight your contribution. You've brought an incredible rich cultural dimension to our town. And so these farm workers at the end of every day, almost every day, worked on taking that old thing to create something that illustrated their presence within the town. And the result, the work of those 13 kind of like Filipino workers is this. If you've ever been to Manila, you would see this is a fairly common sight. They took that rusty old tractor and turned it into a typical Filipino bus that you'd see on the streets of kind of like Manila. Believe it or not, in 2022, in the National Street Art Award, were three finalists: City of Melbourne, City of Sydney, and the little town of Noangrup through GMP 360. And guess who ended up winning the national best of the best? Those Filipino workers are heroes. They appeared on the Filipino morning TV show and whatever. But again, it's been an amazing example of using an asset in community. But this was an initiative of that particular cooperative. Their efforts continue on. They had another facility they realised that if they didn't do something with, if we move to the next slide, Charles, and that is simply that the pub had run down. There was a chance that it was going to be bought by outside interests that weren't probably in the best interests of the town, and the community have decided to do it. And again, not just to recreate a great meeting place for community, but to provide certainly accommodation and whatever. And again, they have launched into this, and this transformation of this particular hotel is happening. Has it happened? Has it improved the town? Boy, has it attracted in people. And certainly I love kind of like reading stories about the baby boom that's actually happening here, the young families that are coming in. And this group called GMP 360 have just been sensational in terms of reinventing that small town of 1,000 people. Their model is worth looking at. They've just had a film done. And as I said, one of the people in it who's been absolutely essential as their company secretary has been Cassie Beek, a music teacher that married a local farmer, came out of the Barossa in South Australia, become very much part of that community. And she now helps to drive it. And she once asked in one of our meetings is, what are your tips, Cassie, for kind of like developing a co-op? And you can see the three that she gave there: start with what you have, build partnerships, learn as you go. And her final two on the next slide, Charles, is involve everyone, stay persistent. Again, one of the things you'll get with this is the link to their story. It's an amazing story of how a town has used the co-op as a way to return not just one, but a whole heap of kind of like stories back. Cassie Beek's own story has been written up, and this will be one of the things that you'll have access to following that. And the other story that I particularly want to, finish with as a great example is what's happened in the Victorian town of Sea Lake. The hotel owned and operated. It is a co-op. Again, an incredible story. Going back just under 10 years ago, the town had two pubs. One was then bought by no one knew who, but all they knew was it was shut and locked up. And suddenly more pigeons started to appear out. And there was a police raid, and the largest hydroponic production area of drugs happening in rural Australia happened. Mysteriously, the pub next day burnt down, so they lost one pub. Go back, Charles, you're going a bit quick. And then the second pub, if we go back, Charles, is that the second one, a publican couldn't make it, went bankrupt, keep going back. This is the Royal Hotel, the one we're actually talking about. He decided that the best thing to do was just one night to close it all up, lock it up, turn the power off and run and hope no one could find him. And it was laid like that, deteriorating over an 18-month period. It eventually was going to come up for auction. A group of farmers broke in one night without permission, checked it out, realised they could do something with it, went to the auction. They had the last bid at $180,000 and bought it. But within days, the Shire had put a work order on, which looked like if they didn't do something quick, it would actually get demolished. Out came the community, rallied, and they, over a period of 2 weeks, absolutely reinvented this particular pub through community engagement. Initially, 20 families putting in money. They realised they needed more money, but they needed more community engagement, and people were keen to help. And so they converted from being a community company into a co-op. And the result is they raised close to $700,000 to kind of like do their initiatives. Many people who used to live in Sea Lake, who no longer there, wanted to be part of it. Many people who had a Sea Lake connection but no longer lived there decided they too could actually join in. And so the evolution of this pub is kind of like developed. And if you move on, Charles, the next slides, you can actually see today they have converted what was derelict into an amazing community attraction in the town and whatever. Their range of accommodation, their eating options, their bar areas are just absolutely amazing. But what the next slides illustrate is what motivated this community to do it. This is the group who did it. This is the group who broke in and worked out whether or not it was viable. You can see kind of like the typical people. These are the community champions who have actually just said, we can do something with it. And ordinary people, farmers, people who operated a couple of businesses, people, long-term residents who knew they needed to get that pub open for a very good reason, as the next slides illustrate. What was it that actually motivated them to kind of like take on running an enterprise and creating a co-op? Just show the next couple of slides. This is their motivation. They realised that they had about 27 young people who were due to take over a family business, whether it be a farm or an agricultural service industry or whatever. They knew without a pub, the nearest pub was 100 kilometres away. With drink driving and all the challenges that go with all of that, they realised you want to keep this group, all of whom will have partners and kids. We need to make sure we keep our pub. And in the words of Alison McClellan, one of the great community builders, the secretary of that co-op, she said, got a lot of young people here, a lot of succession farmers. So we need a town that has facilities, a place where they will want to bring up their kids and keep the community going. It's about future-proofing the town for the next generation. That's what motivated them, not money. I've met with them several times, and I had dinner with their board not long ago, and every one of them said, none of us expect money out of this. What we want is to future-proof our town for our kids. This is their purpose, to support and provide a viable, attractive community hotel as a very important social hub for the local community, and also support other economic activity in the township of Sea Lake and district farming communities by providing attractive recreational accommodation facilities. They've got a community development vision that they're expressing through enterprise. Has it worked? Well, this was a critical goal, was to see the place become a hub for both locals and for the visitors. And so, again, amazing outcomes has been achieved, and it has become this tourist destination that people come. They recognised they had another great asset, which was their nearby lake, and linking that in. The result is, as captured by the next slide of the headline, Victorian town of Sea Lake transformed from ghost town to international tourism hotspot. And at the heart of it is their community pub. Not only that, they also have a community hardware store, community grocery store, co-op being an incredible part of the history of this particular town. And again, really advocate you have a look at that particular ABC video and a documentary and news item. It's just an amazing example. So what are the steps in creating these co-ops, whether they're a service one, the pub, whether it be a worker co-op? Well, really there are 7 kind of like steps that are really needed. And again, the handbook that you'll get as part of this outlines what each of these 7 steps involve. If we go to the next slide, Charles, the steps, just go on to the next one, are all identified, as I said, in the handbook. Sorry, keep going. And then within it, some of those important reasons why a community co-op enterprise, as opposed to just an incorporated community structure where maybe 20 families put up the money, why use the co-op? Well, to me, there is kind of like seven very good reasons why I think the co-op as an option is worth thinking about. It's the ultimate in community control, that one member, one vote stuff. It has at the heart of it as its principle mutual and community benefit ownership involvement. When you register, you've got to state how the membership are going to be involved in it. So people have got to identify how much they're going to actually do and use that co-op as part of their application to becoming a co-op. I love it. It has limited liability, like any incorporated structure. It has very compliant simplicity. It usually goes through the state register as opposed to going through ADSEC in Canberra. It's much more simpler than kind of like using a structure. It enables blending of roles where people can take on different functions. Membership has got to be active. It's a condition of being a co-op. So again, people have got to identify what are they going to do to kind of like help. And then being a not-for-profit, particularly if you opt for being a non-distributing co-op, you're able also to attract any government or philanthropic support. Interesting, GMP picked up a $25,000 grant from BCCM to get someone in to kind of like do all the architectural drawings for their hotel. And with that, they look like they've scored a $150,000 grant out of the state government to actually open the first part of it. Again, the benefit of being a co-op as opposed to being a typical incorporated company. The strengths of the co-op movement, there's an Australian co-op called Mercury. They've actually identified what they think are kind of like those critical kind of like advantages in terms of member-based capabilities, its adaptive structure, and this focus upon cooperation, which is one of their key seven kind of like principles and certainly one of the values. Julian Ross put it well when he said, when members of a community come together for a common cause without purely financial or commercial motives, when they cooperate and collaborate to save or preserve something that's important and valuable to the community, they unlock something very powerful. And I suppose as I look at Sea Lake, as I look at Noangarup, I look at Wagen, I look at where people have been using this co-op structure to do things, it's incredibly exciting. I love what the board member there, Matt, from this little co-op in Victoria said, small town, I think there's only people live in this little town. Small towns like us, I can never pronounce this place, should increasingly be turning to the co-op model in an attempt to keep local businesses and the services they provide afloat. That's part of the reason we've taken on this project. This is a way to step into the new age. Australia has historically built co-ops in rural areas, and with corporatisation, it's made it harder and harder for people in rural communities to sustain business. We see the co-op as a natural progress, even though it's circling back. It's enabling capital to expand on the services, and it's about sharing the workload rather than in terms of rather than everything falling back on one person, couple, or family. It also reduces the risks associated with running a small business. I put that up, it's long as a quote, but really what Matt just captures so well why I'm excited about trying to promote kind of like the co-op model. There's a lot of help available if you happen to be in WA. Peter Wells, the secretary, knows more about co-ops than any other person on the planet, I think. Incredibly helpful in terms of setting it up. They have a membership of, around about 70 co-ops in WA. And these are just some of the things that they can actually do if your community was interested in taking on some form of co-op activity. This is what they could actually do. Then in the other states, there is actually, if you show the next slide, there is a more, I've mentioned BC, based in Sydney. There is the Co-op Federation doing a similar role to the WA Co-op Federation. And again, this is the phone number. Again, they have over 200 members kind of like as part of this. This is an accounting firm in the south of WA in the town of Albany called Lincoln's. And there's a guy there called Thomas Warner who just loves like working as an accountant with people who want to explore the co-op. They as a firm will actually work with you, make no charge, but hope that when it's beginning to generate an income, then you might use them as their accounting firm. It's amazing the kind of like free service they provide. Tom has been instrumental in helping a whole pile of country towns explore co-ops in WA and the Northern Territory and part of South Australia. What are the secrets of success? That ongoing community ownership and engagement. Like every community thing, it's about keeping people actively involved, not the same old faces. That's why I love the co-op. Everyone's expected to contribute. That strong focus on community outcomes and viable business, both are important. We're not running a charity, we're also running an enterprise. So keeping an eye on both how we're achieving our social community objectives, but also our economic ones. Having a capable and committed board willing to put the effort in, having adequate financial investment right from the start. And then to me, one of the things, and I don't understand why we're not doing enough of it, I think just marketing what I call our cooperative advantage. And it was a phrase stolen from Tim Mazerol at UWA, saying, why aren't co-ops telling more people about being a co-op? There's something appealing that actually can be part of your marketing. And so I finished with this as kind of like a final set of stories about this thing. I mentioned earlier in a little town called Watheroo that they have a co-op. But what I find interesting is none of their signage tells you it's community owned. To me, if you're driving through and you see that, that's actually one of the reasons you might want to stop. Wow, that's interesting. I'm actually helping the local community. And yet, here's an enterprise that is a co-op, provides an amazing set of services. But down the road, a mere 40K is about them. All they wanted to remind you of, we're community owned. And you know what? They're saying that just attracts in so many people passing by. We're using those critical words to actually do it. I love the way they market themselves together for the future. Again, I think we underestimate the power of this thing called community. People belong, people want to connect. People actually do believe in this thing called community, and it needs to be part of our actually marketing. And finally, the group who do it best of all, I don't know anyone doing it more effective, is that was created during World War II when a fellow running a grocery store tragically lost his only son, and in his grief decided to give his business at a very special deal to the community. And they formed back there in 1945 a it's interesting to see that back then they had 771 people came together to form the Barossa Co-op. Today they have 23,000 members. And boy, I don't know any other that drives economic and community development like this one. I love their purpose, living in the Barossa better by providing exceptional lifestyle experiences for our members and the broader regional community. You can see there in terms of what they do to help connect locals. But what I love, the way they've been able to build that membership and that customer kind of like support base is by reminding people we're about community. We're about supporting local employment. We're about doing it. And if you shop, you know what? You help to kind of like do it. And so the language that comes out from that co-op is all about we're doing this together. And through that, we're expanding the options for people living within the Barossa. If you've never ever been to the Barossa there in Newry, that town there in the Barossa, worth dropping in. It is an amazing enterprise built on incredible business principles, but also very strong community. They learned very early this thing called community can be a powerful economic agent. To me, this is, again, if we just go back to that slide, across the road from the Barossa Co-op's another co-op. It's a pub. It's called the Vine Inn, and some of you who've been to Newry might have seen it. But I loved it when I walked out of there the other day. I was there a week ago. That's what I saw. Thank you for supporting your community-owned hotel. You know, that language is powerful. Picking it up is why this is kind of like what we need to do. When I was in Canada, you drive through those grain growing areas of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. The co-op, as I said earlier, is all there. But I just love, here was one of the vehicles I saw out the front of the car park. locally invested, community mind, lifetime membership benefits, reminding people all the time, become part of it, become part of this kind of like community, economic community we're creating called the local co-op. And again, I think these are the messaging that we talk about as being that cooperative kind of like comparative advantage that we need to build in. Interested in doing this stuff, there's a lot of resources to help established and to develop. If we just keep going. Firstly, I mentioned a handbook that was made possible through BCM and CBH that I penned about 12 months ago. Charles is going to send you the link to that. You can download in it, particularly the biography. If you have a look at page 61, a whole pile of other resources that you might want to download, and an incredible reading list of what, and particularly case studies of what people are doing in small towns. The second thing it does highlight is the Bunya Fund, which is set up by the Council of Co-ops and Communities, and they offer to kind of like particularly rural communities funding to kind of like either establish or develop or take their co-op. And so particularly the Quairading co-op where I am today, they've been a beneficiary. That $25,000 to get the architect in to do all their drawings to get their hotel going in Nowangarup was all done through Bunya. And again, it's a great little resource. And the person to talk to who just lives and breathes co-op in rural towns is Anthony McMullen. He lives in a small country town. He's been passionate about the roles it can play, and he actually coordinates this particular fund and would love to do it. Closing, can I leave you this statement? Co-ops make money to do things rather than doing things to make money. It is not set up to please and to return back to a set of shareholders. It's there to return back to the membership. And the more that that membership reflects the community and is linked to kind of like the community, the better it is. So yes, if we want to kind of like retain or back services, whether it be childcare, whether it be aging in place, whether it be the grocery, whether it be the hardware, whether it be the fuel outlet, and like in Yakandanda in Victoria, where they've used the co-op to kind of like create a hardware and fuel outlet. Whatever it is, the co-op is one that I'd strongly kind of like think worth kind of like thinking about. So thank you, Charles. Next question,
my pleasure, Pete.
Slide. If we have time for any kind of like questions or comments that people might have.
So I've just asked anybody to drop a question in the chat if they have. Thank you for your presentation, Pete. Working together as a team, it's good. The distances. So any questions? I know what Ernest Sorolla is one of your favourite quotes there.
It is, and I think it's a good way to finish. And to me, that's what community building is all about. And that's what I think co-ops do incredibly well. I love it because it does expect people's contribution more than just kind of like signing up $25, $100. It is about creating purpose for the future. And I think he does it very well. So, I advocate people very much. Next week, a much more interesting one, and one that will be not me presenting, but there we've got someone, the secretary of the Bailing Up Progress Association, from my point of view, probably the most successful progress development group in the country. Bailing Up is an amazing, that one association has 16 groups functioning and events under it. And Wendy Trow, who has been their president driving force for a long period, will be sharing the story of Bailing Up, a small like community of around 500 people in the southwest of WA. But if you're interested in how do you create a strong resident engaged town action group, this is the webinar to kind of like be at. And you will not be disappointed with Wendy. She is an amazing operator.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Lisa's got a question.
And finally, Charles, we do have a amazing small towns conference.
We do, Pete, but we've got a question from Lisa first.
People of that.
Lisa's got a question. I'm currently working on a project that's researching different models for childcare in small rural towns. Any case studies or help along these lines would be great. Lisa, there are a few examples, and Peter and I'll dig some out and shoot them to you via email, if that's all right with you.
Yep.
Excellent.
Can I just say, Lisa, check out co-ops in Saskatchewan in Canada. They have particularly developed their own childcare cooperative model there. And I reckon in Saskatchewan now there'd be over 30 communities have actually set up a co-op for childcare. And it's now starting to attract a lot of support from philanthropic and government sources, using the co-op as the way in, particularly in a town, to fulfil those needs for childcare. So have a look at their childcare model that's coming out of, I think it's called Saskatchewan. I think it's called Co-ops Saskatchewan. They have a whole program that's just about co-ops for childcare. Something that we desperately need, something like this here. I think it's becoming housing and childcare are the two critical needs that every small town is now having to face that maybe 5 years ago they didn't face. Mm.
Excellent. So, Pete, if you just want to wrap up with a mention of the conference, that'd be great.
Yeah, the conference is now only 5 weeks away in Kapunda. To me, it's going to be one of the most fun and engaging activities, and I really encourage you to think about going. If you are, please register soon. We just need to a handle on final numbers. We are expecting around about 120 people from about 70 small towns coming. But the program is incredibly exciting. It's not about just sitting and listening to people sitting out there with others with a glass of wine in your hand and interacting and seeing and tasting kind of like experiences across a very exciting part of rural Australia around that Barossa and Lightons and through to Burra. I was there only a week ago, and I was just blown away with some of the initiatives that are happening out there. And we hope this conference will give you a chance to interact with other communities who are doing this type of stuff. So do think about coming. Go onto our website if you want more details. And please, if you're coming, read soon so we have a handle on final numbers.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. And everybody will get a copy of this video later today or first thing tomorrow. And there will be links in there through to the conference website. So please do make the most of it. One of the issues will be around accommodation. So it's first in, best dressed. So please, I know, Andrew, you're coming. It'll be great to see you. And we know a number of other people from these calls have also registered. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll leave it there. Thank you. We'll be back here again in a fortnight for the final one, as Peter said. But enjoy your Wednesday and take care. See you soon.